Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Trust the weekend was good. It's been raining here, and we hope this is the onset of the long rains. Although some places have been completely washed out, bridges and so forth, it's quite dramatic. Macro thoughts, interesting times. This is a measure of geopolitical risk via J.S. Blokland, and it speaks to a very elevated geopolitical risk reading. But obviously, if one looks at the risk flashpoints, Korean Peninsula, there seems to have been some forward movement there. I think if you look at the Middle East, largely the Syrian government has won that. But it's interesting to see that the risk read is so high. Russia's $4 billion bond sale defies UK Spat as bids roll in, which is another interesting factor when you think of it, that the London market's still providing liquidity to Russia in an environment where there's this argument around Novichok. Home thoughts, Saruni, which we visited last year. This is Sunday sunsets and silhouettes. Kelly, Netherwood, thank you for the beautiful photograph. It's well worth visiting. It's perched high above the Samburu. It takes you about 30 minutes to get to the Samburu, but it's an extraordinary situation. The less there was to see, the harder he looked, the more he saw. Don DeLillo's Point Omega. I like that quote. And then this, a baobab tree under the Milky Way, South Luangwa, Zambia, Will Burrid Lucas. And my final home thought is a cheetah photo of the day by Havas Mir. Political reflections, an exit poll by pollster VTSIOM showed Putin, who has already dominated the political landscape for the last 18 years, and won 73.9% of the vote. A thumping victory will extend his total time in office to nearly a quarter of a century until 2024, by which time he'll be 71. Only Joseph Stalin ruled for longer. Radio Liberty, in an interesting article, says Kremlin has placed Putin entirely above and outside of politics. Instead, his entire campaign has consisted of a few Deus ex machina type larger-than-life appearances. Even more importantly, those that the Kremlin has placed Putin entirely above and outside of politics. The 65-year-old incumbent who has ruled the country for more than 17 years has become as much a symbol of Russia as the matryoshka or the double-headed eagle. 5th of October 2015, I wrote a piece called Putin as a Geopolitical Grandmaster, and I was referencing the Syrian intervention at that time. He says it's nonsense to think Russia would poison spy in Britain. As for the tragedy that you mentioned, I found out about it from the media. The first thing that entered my head was that if it had been a military-grade nerve agent, the people would have died on the spot, he told reporters. Secondly, he said, Russia does not have such nerve agents. We destroyed all our chemical weapons under the supervision of international organizations, and we did it first, unlike some of our partners who promised to do it, but unfortunately did not keep their promises. As a whole, of course, I think any sensible person would understand that it would be rubbish, drivel, nonsense for Russia to embark on such an escapade on the eve of a presidential election. It's just unthinkable. I like these tweets from Karl R.E. Marx. I love the idea that in every embassy in the world there's a bunch of people whose job is to get expelled. They just sit there every day playing cards, smoking, waiting for a diplomatic crisis. Except in embassies of small countries, obviously, where they can only afford one person to be expelled. If more get expelled, the same person has to make the same trip several times. Cambridge Analytica's Whistleblower reveals a data grab of 50 million Facebook profiles. This is Take a look at this from Channel 4 News. This goes back to something I wrote about in December 2016 when I said we have a DV-8 Tomahawk. And I said then Russia ran a seriously sophisticated program of interference, mostly digital. And what's clear now is that Cambridge Analytica instrumentalized that intervention. The Cambridge Analytica files, I created Steve Bannon's psychological warfare tool, meet the data whistleblower. Or as Wiley describes it, he was the gay Canadian vegan who somehow ended up creating Steve Bannon's psychological warfare mind XXX tool. And the cyber warfare guys like, oh, you should meet SCL. They do cyber warfare for elections. So as I said in December 2016, I have no doubt that Putin ran a seriously 21st century, predominantly digital program of interference which amplified the Trump candidacy. I take you back to Beppe Grillo, comic turned leader of the Five-Star Movement in Italy, who said it is the deflagration of an epoch, it is the apocalypse of the information system, of the TVs, of the big newspapers, of the intellectuals, of the journalists. He is right, traditional media has been disrupted and the insurgents can broadcast live and over the top. From feeding the hothouse conspiracy frenzy online, a constant state of destabilized perception, timely and judicious doses of WikiLeaks leaks which drained Hillary's bona fides and her turnout and motivated Trump's, what we have witnessed is something remarkable and noteworthy. Putin has proven himself an information master, and his adversaries are his information victims. This is the cover from the New Yorker for this week. Not much more to be said. The late Stephen Hawking on Donald Trump, he is a demagogue who seems to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who endured a year of withering attacks from President Trump, is fired by the Justice Department days before he was to receive his pension. Sir Axiel Till, replying to John Cleese, sums it up. I didn't shoot the deputy. I don't have the gun that shot the deputy. You won't find the gun that shot the deputy in a safe in my basement. Witch hunt. John Kelly, Rex Tillerson was on the toilet when I told him he'd be getting fired. According to those sources, Kelly recounted a very awkward conversation with Tillerson, during which he informed the secretary that President Trump would very soon likely fire him. The awkwardness was less a result of the contents of the conversation than its setting. Tillerson, Kelly told the room, was suffering from a stomach bug during a diplomatic swing through Africa and was using a toilet when Kelly broke the news to him. Mr. Tillerson, for all his failures, sought to provide a moderate counterweight to Mr. Trump's impulsive and irrational views. There is a danger that Mr. Pompeo will reinforce them, says The Economist. Trump would like that too. Xi gets new term as China's president by a vote of 2,970 to 0. Have a look at my article from the 5th of March, Xi Jinping president for life. Sputnik was reporting from the Eastern Ghouta humanitarian corridor. Have a look at this photograph. Assad went near the front line of Eastern Ghouta yesterday. Seen in this from Danny Makasiria. And clearly the government has made gains there, but further north, Turkish-based rebels tear down a statue of PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan in Afrin. They seem to have taken control of that. Watch this short interview with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, seen at his desk. Let's move on to international currency markets. The euro is at 122.64, dollar index 19.19, Japanese yen 105.73, Swiss franc 0.9536, the pound 139.18, the Australian dollar 0.7691, Indian rupee 65.105, South Korean won 1071.29, the Rial 328, Egyptian pound 17.6115, and the South African rand coming close to my buy area of 12, it's at 1198.43. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm expecting it to firm from here. My stop is at 88. Euro dollar 122.65. I don't think we're going to go and look at 125.60 anytime soon. Bitcoin traded below 8,000 and it's now at 8,300. Market cap of all cryptos has shrunk to 287 billion. It was close to hitting 1 trillion at the peak. A death cross looms for Bitcoin. This is from Bloomberg. Fangman now has a combined market cap of $4 trillion. The group of tech stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Nvidia, is up 23% on average this year and 69% over the last 12 months. A continued outperformance, but it's getting very, very rich. WTI crude oil, last trading at $62.17. Remember, we came for the second time close to 60. We bounced off there again. Gold, that's drifting off, last trading at 1308.25. And that's all about the dollar, I think. And it's interesting that with geopolitical risk seen so elevated, gold is not performing in line. Let's move on to sub-Saharan Africa. Burundi, Mrs. Denise Nkurunziza, the president's wife, warns he was chosen by God, not the people. Only God can remove him. Don't even think about backing protesters. You'll die like them. That's pretty dramatic language. President of Mauritius, Amina Gurib Fakim, has resigned over credit card fraud. Jacob Zuma is to face 16 counts of corruption over arms deal. South African all shares down 2.36% year to date. Dollar versus rand 11.98.43. It's a buy around the 12 plus level. Egyptian pound is at 17.6115. Nigerian all share up 9.66% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 25.58% year to date. President says Zimbabwe is to hold elections in July. As a nation, party and government, we're looking forward to very peaceful, transparent and harmonized elections in July this year, Mnangagwa told reporters after a meeting with South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa on Saturday night. Akim Steiner, who was based here for a while, was visiting as well, and he said the UN supports Zimbabwe's new elections set for July. Robert Mugabe, he spoke out as well. Have a look at his interview via SABC News. And the point is that I think the genie is out of the bottle in Zimbabwe. It's like Christmas at one marcher in November last year. He had a warning for whoever takes over Zimbabwe. If the next leader does the same, we're going to come out again. The military, which launched this decapitation, certainly set to shape the outcome, but now have a tiger by the tail. Interestingly, the military have been walking on linguistic eggshells and sidestepping the word coup with finesse, which is something that Mugabe picked up on. Just back from incredible Sudan trip, highly recommend Antiquity, History and Lovely People, Pyramids and Sphinxes. That's Ilya Grignev. Tanzania's rogue president is a hard-hitting article in The Economist. A bit like President Donald Trump, Tanzania's John Magufuli likes to fire employees on television. In November, Mr. Magufuli used a live broadcast from a small town in the north of the country summarily to dismiss 2 officials after they failed to remember instantly details in their budgets. When one protested that she couldn't reasonably be expected to be able to recall every figure, Magufuli told her, "You can't talk to me like that." Since coming to power in the country of 55 million on the east coast of Africa in 2015, Magufuli, nicknamed the bulldozer from his time as roads minister, has bashed foreign-owned businesses with impossible tax demands, ordered pregnant girls to be kicked out of school, shut down newspapers, and locked up immoral musicians who criticize him. The journalists and opposition party members have disappeared, political rallies have been banned, and mutilated bodies have washed up on the shores of Cocoa Beach in Dar es Salaam, the commercial capital. Magufuli is fast transforming Tanzania from a flawed democracy into one of Africa's more brutal dictatorships. It is a lesson in how easily weak institutions can be hijacked and how quickly democratic progress can be undone. Saying that not all violence by the state over the past year, about a dozen police officers have been killed in Kibiti, a mostly Muslim coastal town about 70 kilometers south of Dar es Salaam. Police have seemingly responded in kind. Little news leaks out from the region. Foreign journalists have turned back long before they reached Kibiti. A Tanzanian journalist investigating the killings has been missing for 3 months. German startup investor Rocket is exploring a stock market listing of its loss-making African online shopping platform Jumia. Investors expected to shortly mandate banks for an IPO of Jumia, which describes itself as Africa's leading online shopping destination. According to a presentation from Rocket Internet, Jumia saw its adjusted loss before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization widen to 80.7 million euros. In the first 9 months of 2017, revenue edged up to 57.3 million euros. 22nd of January, I was writing about how e-commerce and home-based deliveries have changed the world from London to China. I was saying, given the ubiquity of the smartphone here in Kenya, I'm certain the same disruption is headed our way, and that a lot of commercial real estate will be legacy assets. The millennials with their avocado eating and cryptocurrency trading ways are just as likely to be African as they are European or American. Let's move on to Kenya. The Daily Nation had an article on called The Power of a Handshake, which was reiterating my article, Le Rapprochement. World Bank measure of how far a dollar would stretch if converted into local currency. On this measure, Kenya is more expensive than Poland, according to The Economist. Have a look at that. Prices in Chad, for instance, are comparable to those in Malaysia, where incomes are 14 times higher. Mr. Hassan thinks that the low agricultural productivity explains the puzzle. In much of Africa, farmers scratch away at thin soils with little fertilizer and no irrigation. If that is right, then cheaper food may boost manufacturing by making wages more competitive. From 18th century Britain to 20th century Asia, industrial revolutions are often preceded by agrarian ones. Poor countries must hope for a repeat. Interesting article, Kenya's digital credit revolution 5 years on. More than 1 in 4 Kenyans has taken a digital loan. Based on the survey, we estimate that 27% of Kenyan adults have taken at least one digital loan, for a total of over 6 million borrowers. Most have taken a loan in the past 90 days, suggesting a large number of active borrowers. And it's an interesting article, and Mshwari seems to have benefited from a first-mover advantage. Today it has more than twice as many unique borrowers as its closest competitor, KCB and Pessimism. Statistics to back that up. Do take a look. For the February 2018 Eurobond issued during the week, the yields on the 10 and 30-year Eurobonds have decreased by 20 and 10 basis points to close the week at 6.8% and 7.8%. Standard newspapers reported a full year loss after tax of 210.838 million shillings. Full year revenue was down 3.278%. Total operating costs were up 12%. Profit before tax was a loss of 282.186 million versus a profit of 269.475 million the previous full year. Basic and diluted earnings per share was negative 3 shillings and 32 cents versus positive 2 shillings and 14 cents. No dividend. Cash and cash equivalents at the end of the year was negative 369.851 million. They said group's turnover decline was mainly due to reduction in print advertising revenue by 17%, occasioned by business uncertainty during the electioneering period. Broadcast division revenue growth was strong at plus 16%. Group's operating costs increased by 12%, driven by an increase in direct and overhead costs by 4% and 20% respectively, due to increased cost of election coverage during the period, increase in libel and bad debt provisions, marketing costs incurred during the newspaper redesign process, and professional fees. It is expected that the media industry will generally recover from the harsh political environment witnessed in 2017. Well, we all knew media had been squeezed, and now we know how hard the squeeze was. My piece over the weekend was about geothermal energy, Japan, and Kenyan. I spend a lot of my time watching the tape. The velocity and the volatility of the real-time tape is breathtaking. On Friday, I was watching events unfold at the Treasury, where the Cabinet Secretary, Henry Rotich, and the Japanese Ambassador to Kenya, His Excellency Toshitsugu Uesawa, who, by the way, is a fluent Kiswahili speaker, a tremendous wag and can crack jokes, rather fine jokes in 3 languages, Japanese, Kiswahili, and English, were appending their signatures to loan agreements for Al-Carrier 1, Al-Carrier 2, and Al-Carrier 3 geothermal power rehabilitation project amounting to 9.53 billion shillings. Kenyan is also in the process of building a new 140 megawatt plant financed by a $400 million loan from JICA that is expected to start running by 2018. I learned that the loan has a 10-year moratorium and that interest is charged at 1% last week in a hearing before the House Appropriations Committee. The U.S. Navy Secretary Richard Spencer accused Beijing of weaponizing capital, saying China is making loans, not grants or aid, to finance infrastructure projects. If the debtor fails to make payments, the asset owner comes and reclaims it and says these are now ours, said Spencer. At a time when the cost of borrowing is a key issue around infrastructure, Japan deserves a shout-out for giving Kenya a long and inexpensive ramp. The Japanese have been a very strong partner to Kenya ever since I can recall. I told Prime Minister Shinzo Abe the same at the TCAD conference and reminded him that it was the Japanese who built the Nyali Bridge an eternity ago. We are keen on improving the lives of Kenyans through technologies that promote sustainable energy. We laud Kenyans' capabilities in managing development projects, so said the ambassador. Japan, through the development agency JICA, has backed Kenyans' geothermal drive in a big way. Kenya generated 45 megawatts of power with geothermal energy in 1985, now generates about 630 megawatts. Nearly 400 megawatts of that production has come online since 2014. No matter how you cut it, that is a significant amount of generation in the geothermal world, says Jean Sionich, Chief Executive of EGS. Kenya ranks 9th worldwide in terms of installed geothermal capacity, just behind Iceland. Geothermal energy is widely attributed as having lifted Iceland from poverty in the 1970s to middle-income status. Kenyan has been in existence for 60 years and last year appointed its first woman managing director, Rebecca Miana. The share price, which gained over 40% in 2017, is plus 5.26% this year. Interestingly, last year, PICSA, which is wholly owned by the South African government, mopped up around 10% of the shares in the company. The arrival of PICSA completely changed the dynamics around the share price. PIC extinguished the excess supply of shares and, by my estimate, continued to build on that position. Kenyan reported a first half earnings where Earnings per share declined 11.429%, essentially because of an uptick in the speed of depreciation and amortization. Half-year steam revenue accelerated by 27.951% and speaks to the underlying and even exponential shape of the forward earnings curve. Kengen was one of my picks for the year, and I expect a significant absolute return outcome at the end of this year. Green and renewable energy is a big thing now. I'm sure the MD is looking keenly at the opportunity around securitizing steam assets with a view to issuing a green bond. The Kengen infrastructure bond was a pioneering move for the Kenyan capital markets. I expect them to play the same catalytic role with the green bond. Kengen trades on a trading P of 6.56. Headline revenue growth was running at 4.297% at the half-year mark. Rebecca Miana and her team have a significant tailwind in their sales. 9 shillings a share will look very cheap at the end of the year, in my opinion. Kengen is up 5.263% year to date. Share price data is there on rich wrap-ups. Top 10 geothermal countries based on installed capacity. This was the 2017 year end. The announcement regarding Stanbic Kenya lifted the share price 7.19% on Friday to close at 89.50. Stanbic is up 10.4932% year to date. Equity Bank closes at a fresh 2018 high and is plus an eye-popping 28.3% in 2018, ahead of its full-year earnings release. On a year-to-date basis, the shilling has gained 1.8% against the dollar, as per Saiton. Nairobi all shares up 7.53% year-to-date and closed at a new all-time high. According to Ochirob, Safaricom's M-Pesa revenue will surpass KCP's operating income by 2019. The NSE 20 is up 2.42% this year. Nakumatt audit reveals 1.8 billion shilling tax debt. According to Kenya Wall Street, the debt profile is as follows: suppliers 18.6 billion, banks 6.8 billion, short-term debts 4.8 billion, KRA 1.8 billion, staff 1.8 billion, other creditors 1.2 billion, and bondholders 1.1 billion. But if that's counting commercial paper, that looks like a small number. Because when I looked at the commercial paper, it looked as if it was about 7 billion. Carbassin reported half-year earnings per share was up 1.563%. Turnover declined 6.415%. Operating profit was down 24.507%. Profit before tax was down 0.579%. They'd had a positive adjustment on revaluation of equity investments. Profit after tax was up 0.374%. No interim dividend. EPS was up 1.563%. Turnover for the first 6 months of the year reduced by 6% compared to the same period last year to lower demand in local markets. Regulatory changes arising from mining royalties and county governments' demands and expectations continue to pose new challenges to businesses and operations. No interim dividend, in line with the previous year's half-year earnings. And finally, let me leave you with Carl Tundo, who won the 2018 ARC Safari Rally in a final day of drama. Once again, thank you kindly for stopping by.